good to meet you.
And you, Robert. Yeah, I mean, I've known of you since my very first forays into this area. So I feel quite honoured to be talking to you.
I'm equally honored. I have been reading your research, I believe, for 20 years now,
Yeah, be about that. Yeah.
because you wrote a paper called Aromas of Rosemary and Lavender Essential Oils Differentially Affect Cognition and Mood in
Yeah.
Healthy Foods.
Yeah,
And
that was my first one. Yeah.
yeah, and one of your giant papers as well.
It's certainly my most cited paper.
Right, right. And so that was in 2003.
Yeah, yeah.
And in 2023, so 20 years later, I'm seeing the impact of a rosemary containing drink on event-related potential neural markers of sustained attention. So we've got rosemary again, or still.
Mm.
So I wanted to ask you, what's special about rosemary? Is there something special about rosemary in cognitive function?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? And let me try and give you a bit of how I got into this sort of thing, actually, because so when I first left school, I studied applied chemistry, and I studied applied chemistry not out of a great deal of interest in it, but I was always going to go into the family business. The family business was a tanning business. We made leather for shoes, slippers, industrial garments, and things like that. And I was just getting a bit of an education before I went into that. And I did go into that business. But after 10 years, I decided I didn't like it and I wanted to do something else. So I left the business and went back to university to study psychology. And going through my final year project for my undergraduate psychology degree, I was interested in cognitive enhancement. I was interested in how can we make our memory, our attention, things like that. How can we make it better? And I was particularly interested. I'd been looking at research that had been done with people giving people glucose in glucose drinks to provide more energy to the brain through the glucose load being delivered to the brain. And I thought, well, that's quite interesting. And I looked at it from the other side of the coin, because all that glucose is turned into energy by metabolism with oxygen. And so I thought, well, let's look at it from the other way. What happens if we give people supplemental oxygen to breathe by giving them pure oxygen to breathe rather than just standard air, which is only 21% oxygen? And so my PhD was just looking at all of that, and we found some positive benefits of having pure oxygen in short amounts. It did improve things. It's quite interesting. At that time, though, so this was sort of late 90s, 98, somewhere around about there, there was quite a popularity around the world for oxygen bars, where people would go into these places and they'd be able to put a little nasal cannula on and breathe oxygen for a bit, and they would come out and they would say, oh, this has made me feel livelier, it's made me feel more relaxed, it's made me feel more alert, also these various different things. And I found that particularly interesting, because in all of my PhD research, giving people oxygen to breathe, they couldn't tell the difference between oxygen and air. So we didn't find that it did make people actually feel any better, any different. And so we thought, well, why? I started thinking, why might it be that these people are coming out then and claiming all these different sorts of effects for the oxygen? And you look into it, and these oxygen bars, well, they add aroma to the oxygen. So you can go in and you can get it flavored in all these different ways. Now, the people who were running the oxygen bars were really doing that, not out of any knowledge of aroma, but they were doing it because if you do just give people oxygen to breathe, they don't feel any different. And they'd come out and say, well, bit of a waste of time. I've just spent a fiver on that and I don't feel any different. So they thought they'd put the flavors in so that at least you knew that you were getting something for your money. And so then that sort of got me thinking about, well, perhaps there's something in the aromas that they're adding that's making a change to the way people think. But the rosemary thing, I have to thank an undergraduate student. Once I had finished my PhD and I started lecturing, an undergraduate student came to me, Jenny Cook, co-author on that first paper in 2003, and said, what do you know about rosemary? And I said, I don't know anything about rosemary apart from maybe cook with it occasionally. And she was interested in aromatherapy. And she said, well, rosemary is associated with memory. I said, is it? And she said, yeah. And she brought me all this sort of information going back, historically to the ancient Greeks using rosemary for memory and students wearing garlands of rosemary around the heads when they're studying and all these sorts of things. Oh, well, that's interesting. But I sort of did a quick Google Scholar. Well, I don't know if we had Google Scholar back in the other days, actually, but I looked around for some papers and there wasn't an awful lot done, but there was a little bit done around rosemary. So we did that first study and we used rosemary because we thought it might have a beneficial effect on memory. And we used lavender largely because rosemary being an arousing aroma, we thought we'll have a comparable sedative aroma, just as a comparison aroma. And yeah, we found some beneficial effects from rosemary on particularly long-term memory, which was fascinating for me. That it was something that was wholly new that I knew nothing about at that time, but I was absolutely fascinated by it once I'd found that. And it opened up this whole new world of essential oils and aromas. And over the years, I still feel that I've only dabbled my toes in the water at looking at some of these things. But what I've become increasingly interested in is what is it about rosemary aroma that might be beneficial for memory? And so I've considered, as I'm sure many people have, the different ways that aromas affect behavior. So first of all, there's just what the aroma is like and its psychological qualia. When we smell it, all aromas are slightly different. They have different notes and these sorts of things. And we like some of these things more than others. And there's the aromas that we like are associated with better performance on things, and the aromas that we dislike on poorer performance. So it's like, well, that could be one way that rosemary works. But then I thought, well, yeah, but I'm not sure that rosemary is an aroma that people find particularly pleasant. It's nice enough, but it's not something that you think that you'd sniff and think, well, I'll have that everywhere I go. So then we're thinking about, well, as soon as you start looking at aroma, smell, and the olfactory system in humans, you suddenly realize that this sense that we have is not just a vestige of our evolutionary past, that we kind of rather think that aroma is, that olfaction is, in a way. It's sort of like, we kind of think, well, it's not really important to us, but that we like perfumes and things like that. But you find that the olfactory bulb behind the nose, it's connected to more areas of the brain than any other sense organ that we have. It is, which kind of gives an indication of how important it is to our brain function and how it can affect so many different things. And so one thing that could be the case is that you smell rosemary and the way that it interacts with the olfactory bulb just triggers certain different areas of the brain, perhaps those associated with memory, and that can improve memory as well, potentially. However, the one that really grabbed me was when I was looking at some of the research, that people had done with sort of bench research looking at constituents in rosemary essential oil and animal work, they found that a number of compounds in rosemary, and particularly the one that they focused on was 1,8-cineol, because that's like the largest by volume in the essential oil usually. But it actually interacts.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, it interacts with the acetylcholine system in the brain. And acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that is fundamentally associated with memory. It's the neurotransmitter system that is completely destroyed in Alzheimer's and dementias, where memory is completely destroyed. And what 1,8-cineol does is it stops the breakdown of this neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, which means it can act longer, which means it can have a more reinforcing effect on things that you are trying to learn and help strengthen those memories.
You're suggesting there's actually more than one mechanism of action.
Well, I believe that there are a number of mechanisms. Yeah, I mean, the one that I haven't mentioned as well is expectancy, which isn't really an olfactory or aroma-based mechanism so much as if we believe something is going to do something, then to some extent it will. And you can manipulate the way that people behave by giving them various different expectancies. But that's not something that I think is really at play here.
No. If I let you continue talking, you're going to answer all my questions.
Sorry, Robert. I do tend to run at the mouth sometimes.
So some of my questions were like, does it matter if somebody likes or dislikes the smell? You already addressed that.
But well, I mean, I like the idea of pleasantness of aroma and the effects that it has, but I've not done much work in that area apart from we always ask participants how likable they found the aroma at the end of the study.
This is before, during, or after?
This is after.
After, right.
Yeah. So in all of the studies that I do, I don't tell them that we're looking at aroma. I don't tell participants that the study has got anything to do with aroma.
Right.
Because I want them to be as naive as possible.
This is not unusual in psychological research, right?
No. Deception is one of our best weapons in psychological research. Is we don't tell anybody what we're doing, because people will, whether intentionally or unintentionally, act in a way that they think you want them to act. So if we said, right, we're looking at this rosemary aroma, we think it's going to improve your memory, people will try harder. It's just what people do. So we don't tell them that. So we want them to be naive.
So in most cases, you're diffusing an essential oil into the room.
Yeah.
And they might or might not notice it.
Yes, that's right. Sometimes they do. And they'll say, what's this? They might recognize the smell, or they might just say, there's a smell in the room. What's that? And then we just barefaced lie to them and say, I don't know. There was somebody in here before we came in with you, and they were doing something.
There's the cat.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's my assistant.
Okay.
Yeah, so we always lie.
Can I ask a question?
And
thank you for addressing the rosemary one. And actually, I did want to add to that sage is another plant we've often associated with memory. And sage oil generally is high in cineol as well.
Yes, that's right. I have a couple of papers that where I did use sage because we have another unit or another section of the unit that I do research in who look at nutraceuticals. And they had done some work with sage supplements that they were giving people orally to look at impact on cognitive function. And so I thought, oh, well, I'll do the same thing, but using the aromas. And found largely similar effects from the oral administration to the aromatic administration. The one thing that I really like about aromas, though, is the purity of the administration. So if you give somebody a tablet that's got a drug in it, well, whatever it's got in it, as soon as you swallow it, your body starts going to work on it, metabolizing it, changing it. Some of it will get absorbed in the gut, some of it won't. The bioavailability of something that you swallow is one of those things that's very difficult to gauge, and you have to do quite a lot of heavy research to find out actually how much is getting into the blood. If you inhale something, then it gets absorbed into the blood through the lungs straight away and then gets delivered directly to the brain. Doesn't go past the liver or anything. The first place it goes to from the lungs is the brain. So if you are inhaling something, and if you can absorb compounds from that, it goes straight to the brain, and that makes it a very nice, clean delivery system. And so I like it for that reason.
And there's also the nose to brain route, right?
Well, absolutely. The nose to brain route is the other alternative route for which these effects can happen, and that is, of course, equally direct, if not perhaps more direct.
I think it may be more direct. It hasn't really been figured out yet.
Yeah. Well, that's right. It is so incredibly complex, isn't it? I mean, and it's the same with most things, is that the more that you start to know, the more that you realize that you just don't know. And I just feel that I know so little in this area, really, and there is such a lot that can be learnt from this area that really does need to be done. But it's very, very difficult getting any kind of funding to do the research in this day and age, because, well, all of the research in this sort of area is largely funded by big pharma, who are not interested in funding research into aromas, certainly if not of essential oils and things like that.
I would have thought the opposite. Post-pandemic, there seems to be a tremendous interest in olfaction research.
There is, but it's not from the direction of, if I would say, taking up the centuries of experiential learning, etc., that's come through aromatherapy, and thinking, right, let's look at these things in a more closely monitored scientific way. They're more interested in the mechanisms behind olfaction generally, but not the benefits that aromas can necessarily deliver.
Okay, fair enough.
They can't make any money out of it, really. That's the problem that they have with it, is that they have difficulty making money out of it.
Right. Okay, I believe this was going to be my first question to you. Anyway, here we are.
Yeah.
Tell me about the research center where you work. What are the main aims, and broadly, what kind of research is done?
Yeah, so I work in the Brain Performance and Nutrition Research Center at Northumbria University. This was set up about 25 years ago, and has always been focused on investigating natural interventions that can improve cognition, mood, well-being, generally in healthy populations. So we don't tend to look for remedies for things. We look for things that can be enhancements for people who are already generally healthy. So that's the work that's largely done in that unit. And most of the work that has developed has been on things like nutraceuticals, things like supplements that you would buy in a health food shop or something or some such, to see if there is any actual real evidence behind them. And the reason that most of the work has been in that direction has been because the most of the people who work in the centre are interested in that area. I am interested in aromas, and I work in the same centre, but I'm not a major player there. But we're all looking for the same sorts of things, natural interventions that can improve performance, mood, well-being, and such like.
Well, you're a major player in the aromatherapy world.
That's very kind of you to say so. I feel that I feel that I am sometimes a little bit of an interloper as a psychologist, sticking their nose into a world where I feel there are people who know probably an awful lot more about this than I possibly could learn in the time that I've been doing it.
Well, not necessarily. How do you view aromatherapy and aromatherapists?
I think that aromatherapy has incredible potential to improve the life and well-being of individuals. I think there's a number of different sort of layers to it, and the layer that I'm at is around the democratization of well-being, and by that I mean being able to take control of your own well-being and not always having to see yourself as perhaps a patient who needs support. So if you can find use of aromas that can improve your life, then you can have ownership of that intervention that you're using, and that's something that I'm really, really interested in. Now, aromatherapists who are providing clinical treatments to clients and such like, I think is an equally interesting area, but not an area that I have been particularly involved in until actually recently. I have recently just done a couple of studies for the International Federation of Aromatherapists. They came to me asking me to do some research for them, which is just coming to its conclusion now. And the one thing that I perhaps have learned from that as much as anything is that aromatherapy is not a standardized thing. Different therapists have their own different approaches to the way that they treat clients, and that was interesting in terms of the research, because I say, yeah, but I really want you to do all the same thing because otherwise it's difficult for me to compare sort of what's going on. And I don't have in terms of the way that they do things, I don't have a problem with that, but it does make the research into that area a little bit more difficult if you're getting lots of different people doing lots of different things in different ways. But yeah, I think it offers great potential, and we shouldn't be surprised at that, because people have been doing it for thousands of years in different ways.
Yeah, perhaps not in the way that it's being done now, but yes.
No, but aromas have always been hugely important to people.
For sure.
Yeah.
I've often felt that, well, I just want to agree with you that, in clinical practice, aromatherapists always use blends of essential oils. And so there are, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of different blends that have been used over time. most of them not recorded for posterity, and that's
Mm.
fine. But this doesn't help researchers so much, because really we want to know what's doing what. And when you're using a blend of essential oils, you know, if it works, if it does the thing you want it to do, that's great. And you know that that blend will do that thing for that person. But it doesn't tell you which essential oil contributed how much.
No, indeed.
So yes, so for aromatherapists to be useful in this area, I mean, I would love to see more of what you also did recently, was comparing lavender oil to a blend containing lavender oil, and what were the different effects. And I think we need a lot more of that, so that we really understand that the blends that we're using are meaningfully useful. You know,
Yes, yeah,
actually, this blend is better than any other blend.
that's right. That's right. This is the sort of thing that does need to be established, I think. And how much work is there involved in that? That is a lifetime or two's work for a number of people to do that kind of research. But we do need to be doing it, yeah, because otherwise, as you say, we don't know exactly what the important component of any particular blend might be.
Do all of that research, yes.
I'll have to get in my TARDIS and get a bit younger or something like that, I think, to be able to do it. But yeah.
In that paper on lavender and the lavender blend, you were quite critical of other lavender research. Could you explain what your misgivings are about the way research is done in this area?
Yeah, there have been, I think generally there's been a lot of research done, and that, as with many areas, people start and they go their own way. Now, what we haven't done is we haven't come to a sort of a standard way of perhaps doing some research, certain research. So there are people who have done research where they haven't taken baseline readings of the things that they're interested in, so anxiety or stress or something like that. So, and then they're claiming that something has affected it. Well, if you don't know how people felt in the first place, if you don't take those pre-readings, then it's difficult to make those claims. But people do that, and that's something of a problem. I think you always need to have these sort of before and after measures.
I haven't noticed that. I'm sure it's true.
There are some studies, yeah, where they haven't taken those baseline recordings. There are other studies where people have directly used physiological proxies, such as heart rate, blood pressure, and for various different psychological states. And the fact of the matter is that these things don't always correlate. The way that people actually feel and physiological markers don't always correlate with one another. And so by using one as a proxy for the other isn't necessarily always a good thing to do. It can be interesting. It can find interesting data, but
if you see heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance all gradually dropping, surely that does tell you something.
Yeah, it can. It does, and it can be a good thing, but it doesn't necessarily tell you anything about the psychological state. And often it's the psychological state that people are really interested in.
Okay, but I just want to stick on this for a moment. So what you're saying is the fact that someone's physiological markers suggest that they're feeling calmer, they may not feel calmer at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In themselves, they might not express that they are. And this is one of those.
I've learned something here. Okay.
It is one of those very interesting phenomena. Yeah, that the way that people feel and the way that their bodies respond are not always in in train with one another. It is quite interesting.
Is this a common belief in psychology, though, that physiological markers do reflect?
Well, I think that it's often considered that they do, but to be fair, it is often also considered that actually, if we are managing to do something that is reducing blood pressure, then that in and of itself is a good thing. Well, assuming that, you've got people with high blood pressure, you want to bring it down. And if you've got something that will bring that down, that in and of itself is a good thing, is a good outcome. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they feel any different. And I think that the two things always have to be taken into account. I remember many years ago, and this has nothing to do with aromatherapy at all, but I remember hearing a talk from someone who was talking about an intervention for postnatal depression. And they were talking about how scores on a certain set questionnaire indicated there was improvements in a number of different areas for a set of women. But they also interviewed them, and the interviews said that they didn't feel any different. So it's that sort of marrying up sort of different elements.
Right. Just following up on the idea of blends and aromatherapy. So I do believe there's a common misconception that when you mix essential oils together, you get synergistic effects always. And the research that we've seen so far on synergy suggests that it happens occasionally and not always. And whenever I say this to aromatherapists, they always look very crestfallen. And then I'll say, but it doesn't matter. It's okay. Synergy isn't this sort of thing that you have to achieve at all costs. And actually, for me, essential oils are already synergistic in themselves. A single essential oil is a synergistic mix. And if you want to mix that synergistic mix with 3 or 4 or 5 others and get greater synergy, well, you might do. Good luck with that. But unless you know you're going to get that effect, you may not.
I would absolutely agree. And I think the point that you made, that a single essential oil already offers that potential for a synergistic effect, is important. And when I think of rosemary, when we've done studies where we've measured 1,8-cineol in blood to see that it's been absorbed, my belief is not that 1,8-cineol is the magic thing. That's not the thing that does it. That's a component in rosemary essential oil, but there are many others that also have pharmacological effects, like oxalic acid and rosmarinic acid. They also have, and I think it's about getting, and there's other compounds, I think it's about getting the right mix of these compounds, and that's how you get the effect.
And just to be clear, rosmarinic acid isn't found in the essential oil.
Is it not in the essential oil? Oh.
No, you will get it in a total CO2 extract of rosemary. You will get, I think, about 20% rosmarinic acid, maybe with carnosic acid as well, but it's not, they're not in the essential oil.
Ah, interesting.
Okay, so let's go to another question. In psychological research, expectation can be a confounding factor, something that can influence the results. How do you account for this?
Well, the fact that expectation can influence the results is something that is just well known from psychological research over the ages, that if we prime people to do things, they will act in a way that they think the experimenter wants them to behave in. And this has been done in all manner of research, particularly in social psychology, about interactions with other people. If you tell people that you expect them to behave in a certain way, they almost always will behave in the way that they've been told that they'll been expected to behave in. It's interesting with things like aromas and other interventions of the kind, where if you say, I'm going to give you this pill, and this pill is going to make you faster in your responses on this test, you typically find that people will be faster because they will try harder. And I've had one study where we manipulated expectancy and found that people did appear to behave differently when they were told that we actually told them there was going to be an aroma, and we told some people that it was going to be it's going to be alerting, it's going to be arousing, it's going to make you more attentive and faster. And we told the others that it's going to be sedative, it's going to make you sleepy, and you're not going to be able to pay much attention. And we did find that it was able to affect the scores of people who received the different information, and hence that's why we always lie to people now, because of that issue. There was a paper published, I would think probably about 98 or something like that, by a couple of researchers who were claiming that all the effects that had been noted for aromas were effectively down to expectancy effects, and they weren't real effects of the aroma at all. I think that it was it missed the mark by quite a way for it, particularly when you consider a lot of the animal data, where animals, of course, can't expect things. But if you put a rodent in a cage and infuse the air with rosemary aroma, it moves around a lot more than it does when the rosemary aroma is not there. And it's like you get effects.
But that's because rats know they're smelling rosemary.
Well, it could be. They could be very clever rats.
No, I use that argument in exactly the same way. What about the rats? What about the rats? They don't have a placebo thing going on.
Absolutely. And that's the value of that kind of animal research, is that if you can show it in animals, there's that higher level human willingness to behave in different ways out of, choice in experiments. You can't get, you don't get it with animals. So it's always a good way of showing these things.
So, sorry. The issue of blinding often comes up with essential oil research. Not blinding to the nature of the study, but the fact that essential oils are very perceptible. So do you see this as a significant obstacle?
It's a problem. And it's a problem that in recent studies that I've been doing, what I've tried to introduce is something described as a perceptible placebo. So I tend to use, or I have tried using coconut as an aroma, just coconut oil as an aroma that I'm not anticipating to get any effects on, but people will notice it.
But you don't know that it has no effect.
Well, this is the thing that will, to be honest, the studies that I've been using it on lately, we haven't quite finished yet. So that'll be something that we'll find, because we've also got completely no aroma groups as well. But it is a problem. It is a problem because they are noticeable, of course. And but I just make the point really that you can't blind people to an aroma, certainly, simply by virtue of what it is. And you can't have a perfect placebo like you can with a pill that looks exactly the same and is the same size, shape, color, but has no active component in. You can't do that with it. with aromas. And it's one of those things that I think you have to some extent, take on the chin. One thing that I think is important is that by saying that the fact that you can perceive an aroma is something of a problem rather suggests that any aroma would cause the same effect, because it's just a question of I perceive an aroma, therefore it's having an effect. Why would just perceiving an aroma have different effects for different aromas if it's just the actual perception element of knowing there's an aroma there? And aromas do have different effects. So I think that that's a reasonable argument against it as well, is that yes, you can perceive it, but the fact that you can perceive an aroma can't account for the effects that it has. I don't think that we are able to, particularly with blended aromas and such like, and think, oh, this particular smell that I am perceiving will have this effect, and that's the effect that it'll have. I don't think that we are able to do that. The effects that they have are real based on what's in them.
I think what you were saying earlier about deception is important too, because we're very susceptible to deception, which is what stage magicians often make good use of.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I mean, deception in psychological research has a long history, and it will continue to be so. And the more you can throw your participants off I was going to say throw them off the scent. That would have been a pun, wouldn't it? of the actual research. Generally, the better. Yeah, we want them to be as naive as possible.
Yeah, you've already answered a lot. Okay, do you believe that human behavior or mood can be influenced by an odor that is present but not perceptible? It's below threshold.
That's a really good question. I haven't done any research to look at that. But what I would suggest is that actually, that's a really good idea, because if an aroma is having an effect that is below, but it is below the perceptible level, then that does rule out some of the potential explanations for how aromas work. Okay. So, that is a useful way of sort of getting to a bit more of the detail as to what's going on.
Psychological perception.
Yeah.
And leaves it as it must be pharmacological. If there's an effect.
That's right.
It must be pharmacological.
Yeah.
That research has been done only 2 or 3 times, but it has been done. It's been questioned as to whether it was really valid. But I think it's fascinating. It's just a fascinating idea,
Yeah, absolutely.
An essential oil could influence your behavior. I mean, the way this is normally done is by creating an association with an odor and then introducing it in a non-perceptible to see whether that has,
it can still have the effect. Yeah. One thing that I've always thought would be very interesting that I've never really followed is doing some research on anosmics. So people who have no sense of smell whatsoever. So if they have no sense of smell, that doesn't mean that the olfactory bulb is not still interacting with certain areas of the brain. And it certainly doesn't mean that you're not capable of absorbing compounds through inhalation.
Are you talking about congenital anosmia or anosmia from trauma or
I would have, again, I don't know an awful lot about anosmia, but I would have thought people who have never had a sense of smell, if there are people who never have had a sense of smell, that would be the ideal group to go for.
Okay, sometimes they're born with no olfactory bulb.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't work quite so well. Yeah, but as I say, I think it's not something I've looked into particularly, but I think it's an area that's worth investigating to try and move things forward a little bit.
Yeah, groovy.
And of course, there are all those COVID patients who lose their sense of smell. So, but you don't really want people who are
Infectious.
infectious to be doing your research on. Yeah,
Not in your lab anyway.
yeah, that's right.
I have noticed that in psychological research with aromas, there's an assumption that certain odors are either pleasant or unpleasant. And this seems to be a really strong thing in this kind of research. I see it a lot. And the problem I have with this is it's simply not so. There are no aromas that either everyone likes or everyone dislikes. So, for example, valerian oil has been used more than once in psychological research as an aroma that people do not like. So this is a sort of pre-research assumption that's just brought in, you're not going to like this. If they actually asked people at the beginning, do you like this or do you not like it, then fine. But they don't do that. So I did a survey and I found that 21.5 of respondents said they did like valerian oil, 29.6 said they did not, and 48.9 were neutral. So, and the same applies to pleasant odors. There are no odors, even vanilla, that everyone likes. So, my question to you is, what difference does it make if someone likes or dislikes the odor that's being used in the research?
Yeah, well, it is interesting, and certainly when I ask people how much they liked the aromas that I've used, you get a wide range of responses from people saying really don't like it to people saying really like it, and you do get that variability. And what I've found is that you get as with so many things, you get a general indication that people like this aroma so much, but it's general, and some people don't. Some people are different to those people.
But if they don't like the aroma, could it still have a positive effect in some way?
Well, I think it could still have a positive effect, because I think that pleasantness of an aroma is one mechanism by which you can improve performance, but it's not the only one. And the fact that you aren't particularly enamored with an aroma, if it's unpleasant, if you find it unpleasant, then it is likely to impair performance, and the unpleasantness effect seems to be stronger than the pleasantness effect. So if you use something, rotten food or hydrogen sulfide or something like that, something that's a really horrible, that everybody would agree is a really horrible aroma, offensive aroma, that will impair performance.
Onion essential oil sometimes is used.
Sorry?
Onion
essential oil. You see, which I don't know. Would some people still not perhaps like onion? I don't know.
But when you're just smelling it on a piece of paper or something, it's not the same as
when you're cooking with it.
It's generally fairly unpleasant.
Yeah. But the unpleasantness effect, as far as I'm aware, is greater than the pleasantness effect. So unpleasantness is likely to have more of a negative impact than something that is pleasant will have a positive impact.
How do you think essential oil research in this area could be improved? What would be your sort of bullet points going forward to people doing research?
Well, I think there are a number of things that would be really, really beneficial. One would be for there to be a research track that effectively used the same standardized essential oil or blend or whatever it was for a number of studies, because what it tends to be the case is that I run a study in the UK with a particular essential oil, somebody else runs a study in Taiwan using a different essential oil of the same, effectively the same plant, but it's been extracted, created somewhere differently. So it's very, very different. So I think we need to try and get a body of research that sort of says, right, this is the essential oil that we're going to look at, and now we're going to look at it in detail. And so then I think that you need to have studies that look at things like brain imaging, blood analyses, and as well as things like cognition, mood, and all of these things, and really try and pin down for just perhaps one essential oil a series of studies that can really perhaps say, right, this is what's going on here. It, as much as anything, I think it would be good if by doing that you could set up a set of procedures, protocols, and study directions that then other people could follow. You say, right, this is what's been done here. Now we can do the same thing there in this way and that sort of thing. I think that would be useful.
I think there's generally a lack of communication. One of the reasons I'm interviewing researchers is because there's a general lack of communication between researchers and aromatherapists. Using essential oils in the way that the researchers were intending them to be used.
Yeah.
I mean, there is some really bad research out there, and some of the bad research is simply because people are sometimes using essential oils and they don't understand essential oils at all. And their research, but they don't understand essential oils. And I just feel like there needs to be a lot more communication, and just thinking about researchers. About research. Yeah, exactly what you're saying. Let's plan something that has makes some sense in a global way.
Yeah, and try and get everybody in step. That would be certainly very, very helpful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. This has been fun. I would love to ask you, what's the name of your cat?
So the cat behind me is Angel.
Angel, huh?
Angel, yeah. So I did have 4 cats at one time. I'm only down to 2 now, but they were all named after Buffy the Vampire Slayer characters. So I had Spike, Drusilla, and both of those have gone now. Unfortunately, I'm left with Angel, and Giles is outside somewhere. But yeah,
Angel's been very good.
Yeah, he likes to keep his eye on me whenever I'm doing something like this online. I teach on distance learning programs that we have, and he always likes to sit there and just make sure that my teaching's up to scratch.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how the students like it as well, just to see him sat there.
Okay, well, thanks so much, Mark.
It's been my pleasure, Robert. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Lovely to meet you, albeit remotely.
And I'm sure we'll talk again about how to do good research.
Yeah, that would be great. That would be great. Love to.
All right, take care.
Okay, thanks very much. Bye now.